Oh, you're live, is what they've told me here. Hello and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. Today we're going to be talking about the midterm elections. It's pretty exciting stuff. There's just good news cropping up everywhere. Yesterday was a terrible day for Donald Trump. It was a terrible day for the crypto grift. Bitcoin and Ethereum are plummeting. And it has also been is developing that it's a very bad day for Vladimir Putin and the Russians. So everything's coming up happy, I guess. Today, I want to talk about the midterm elections. As expected, on some metrics, the Republicans have won. They could very well end up winning by a lot more. But we'll talk about that. But the tone of the news out of the United States is pretty positive, and this for the Democrats, and there's some really good reasons behind that. The Republicans did not perform anywhere near as well as they were expected to. It's kind of crazy how poorly they did compared to expectations. But they could still end up taking both the House and the Senate, and we'll talk about that a bit more. Before we get into it, this is live programming here. We've got a chat that is ongoing. You're encouraged to say anything you want about me, my ideas, about politicians' ideas. As long as you're not getting overtly violent or anything. But we ask that you be civil to each other and that you respect the chat. Don't act disruptive. Don't just keep posting the same thing over and over again. Why do you think Meta is up today? Meta is up today because Facebook fired 10% of its staff. That's why Meta is up today. I'm a little discombobulated today. I was up all night watching election results. But I think I've written myself a list that I'll go through talking about relevant stuff that is worth talking about. What I did not finish saying, because I am so discombobulated, is that please respect the chat. If you do not respect the chat, Logo Cool Extreme is the moderator. He will warn you, cut out whatever you're doing that he doesn't like, and if you don't, he will block you. There is no appeal from the court of Logos, so listen to what he says. So let's talk elections and a few other things. Why are the Democrats happy? The Democrats are completely justifiably happy. What has happened, what started happening, it was very interesting. Florida results typically come in first, and I was getting sort of horrific flashbacks of 2016. I remember the first indication I had that Hillary Clinton might not be winning this one was when she came back, when the Florida results came in, and she was roundly trounced. Last night was a huge night for Ron DeSantis. He's now seen by a lot of people as the clear front runner for the Republican nomination in 2024. He's the governor of Florida. Ron DeSantis won a crushing victory. I think he eked out a victory as governor of Florida back in 2018, and I think he won by 20 points yesterday. So Ron DeSantis looking like a very successful Republican politician. He had massive coattails. Florida now looks like a red state. It's been talked about as a swing state or a purple state for years. It now looks deep red. It was sort of a clean sweep for the Republicans. That's how last night started off. Sort of first results that come in. It's an East Coast state. It's a big East Coast state. It's actually now the biggest East Coast state. Florida is a bigger state than New York since the last census, which is bumping New York into the fourth position among states. So it's a very, very big deal. That's how the election night started last night. Democrats are getting really worried. And then the news just got better and better as the night wore on. I think everybody's expectation was that today we would spend a ton of time wrangling over the Pennsylvania elections, all of them. Pennsylvania is a traditionally very blue, working class Democratic state. that has experienced now decades of industrial decline, and it was part of the blue wall that collapsed that allowed Donald Trump to become president. So battles over Pennsylvania over the past 6 years have become tremendously politically important, and everybody's expectation was that we were going to spend today battling over, votes. The Republicans were going to talk about how we were cheating and votes were going to be coming in late, and that's not what happened. By midnight last night, Pennsylvania was more or less a clean Democratic sweep. We've got Fetterman, fascinating political figure. He's this sort of 6'6" gorilla of a man who is managed to reignite the Democratic Party with the working class in Pennsylvania. He unfortunately suffered a stroke during the campaign period, which most assumed would hurt him against TV doctor Dr. Oz. Did not. Fetterman beat the crap out of Oz. The particularly lunatic Trumpist nominee for Pennsylvania governor lost even more miserably than Dr. Oz did. And it seems like, I haven't gotten too far into the weeds on the House races, but it seems like those were pretty good for the Democrats in Pennsylvania as well. One of the more interesting theories that I ran with in the short this morning that I haven't seen disproved yet is that Florida has become a red state, and Florida has famously become a real draw for conservatives who are just sick of living under this blue state governance in the Midwest, up and down the East Coast. And what I think is not the only factor, but is actually seems to be a large factor here, is that so many Republicans moved to Florida that they've now made Florida a deep red state, but they have pushed another 15 states further into the Democratic camp. I've seen some really optimistic takes saying that Florida is now sort of going to be acting like California does, this sort of magnet for Republicans from all over the country that might actually balance out the Electoral College a bit. I think it is way too soon to say anything that conclusive, but that is a plausible interpretation of what happened last night. Throughout the Midwest, throughout the East Coast, it seemed, and into Texas even, it seems that the Democrats had a dramatically better night than was expected. And this is fantastic stuff. A lot of this comes down to Donald Trump and what a terrible job he has done picking candidates. The Republicans ran a bunch of extreme wackos. If you follow the coverage of elections in the United States, many folks, I more or less agreed with this, wasn't a big hobby horse of mine, but many folks were outraged at the Democratic Party's choice to actually support a fair amount of really crazy MAGA wackadoos Republicans in their primaries and help primary lunatics that were Trump supporters defeat more moderate Republicans, and they were given a lot of guff for that, the Democratic party leaders that did this. Turns out it's been a complete success. Almost all of the Republican wackadoos that were supported by Democrats in their primaries and supported by Donald Trump as well lost, and lost badly. So it's kind of amazing. There were a lot of fundamentals. I should point out, why is it exactly that the Republicans were so confident? It's not just the fact that people are really dissatisfied with the economy. Unemployment is very low, and that could have been much more of a factor than folks were expecting, but people were discounting the fact that unemployment is historically low. Jobs were less of a factor in this election, supposedly less of a factor in this election than they've been in like any other American election ever. Supposedly were less of a factor. But unemployment's very low, but inflation in the United States is higher than it's been in 40 years. So this was this really negative thing that the Republicans had going in their favor. Beyond that, Biden, since the U.S. media turned his incredible victory in Afghanistan, his incredibly good choice in Afghanistan to get the hell out of there, U.S. militarist media turned that into a real problem for Biden and sunk his approval ratings all the way back in August of 2021. He's never come back from that. So the Republicans had surprisingly low unemployment numbers, but what is largely seen, the consensus is a bad economy, had a really unpopular Democratic president they're running against. And then on top of that, then another level, there's been a lot of success by Republicans at the state, local level over the past 10 years or so. They've been able to write a lot of the maps. They've been able to gerrymander a lot of the representative maps in these states, which means that they can create jurisdictions that make it easier for Republicans to win elections. So that's three factors that they had going for them. And then there's the most basic factor, which is that usually in the midterm elections, the party that is not the president's party is favored. That's just normal. That's just what happens. So the assumption was, there are many, many, many assumptions that we're working towards, there's going to be a massive, massive red wave. There was not a massive, massive red wave. To be clear, and we'll get to this, the Republicans could still end up in complete control of the U.S. Congress. They can't end up in, well, it seems looking at the numbers now, it's impossible for them to end up in complete control of Congress today. But they could, on December 6th, with the Georgia runoff, end up in complete control of the House and the Senate. Regardless, they've underperformed massively. They have lost governors, they have lost state houses. This is something particularly egregious. Both Maryland and Massachusetts are very blue states, but they're also very blue states who kind of love a Republican governor. They like the idea of having a governor who's of different party from most of the government, and usually these governors, Mitt Romney is a good example. He was a Massachusetts governor once upon a time. These are usually some of the most successful Republican politicians on the nationwide scene because they're more moderate. They're seen as just people who just care about the economy and business, and they tend to be big winners. Both Massachusetts and Maryland had popular Republican governors that were leaving office, and thanks to Donald Trump, both of them, instead of getting these moderate pro-business Republican governors that these blue states, Maryland and Massachusetts, love, they got like GOP, MAGA, Trump wackadoos to run. And those wackadoos lost. So in what is supposed to be a red wave election, you actually had the Republicans losing state houses, losing control of state governments. Michigan, apparently, one of the state legislatures also flipped, which is also pretty unheard of for what's supposed to be a midterm anti-president. So if you have a president of the other party with a bad economy and a low approval rating, this should have been a slaughter in favor of the Republicans, and it really wasn't. To be clear, there are some places where things worked out well for the Republicans. What's interesting is, so what was expected, and this is what is expected is going to happen. I don't think anybody really disputes this. There's some states, specifically New York and California, Democratic states, that are taking way too long to get their results in. But the clear expectation is that, with the information we have right now, is that the Republicans are going to win control of the lower house of Congress. They were thinking they were going to end up with a majority of 30, 40 votes. They were going to just be able to steamroll the Democrats for the next 2 years. It's looking like their majority is going to be like 5 or 6 votes maximum. To be clear, there can potentially be incredibly damaging, incredibly problematic for the country. We're going to have problems around the debt limit. We're going to have nonstop investigations. But this is not a situation that's going to be particularly fun for the Republicans, because the Republicans are made up of a lot of folks who are kind of sick of Donald Trump at this point, especially after this election last night, where all of Donald Trump's picks have gone down so poorly. Yeah, it's exactly. It's a huge mess for the GOP. So there are going to be a lot of sort of more old line establishment Republican folks in the Congress who want to cause problems for Biden and but want to basically defend corporate interests and do tax cuts. But they've also got still have a fair amount of Trumpy wackadoos and other versions of wackadoos who wackadoo. I wonder if that's a problematic term. Just crazy people that they've got to cater to. So poor Kevin McCarthy, who's going to be the barely majority leader. I think there's been a lot of talk about. There's been a lot of not talk, because it's been a fact that Nancy Pelosi has had to do some progressive wrangling over the past 2 years with the slim Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. It has been give and take. I mean, to some extent, it's been quite positive, I think, for the Democrats, the sort of tension with more progressive parts of the party. The sort of equivalent of the squad or the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene, not someone I like to talk about a ton, but generally seen as a bit of a psycho and really quite one of the louder and crazier members of the House of Representatives over the past 2 years, or is it 4 years now? I think it's just 2 years now. Has been reelected. Lauren Boebert, interestingly, a woman who tried to, I believe, continued to try to bring a gun to Congress. I remember that was the main thing I remember her for. She may have lost. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is there, and she is widely expected to be a big factor in the slim Republican majority to come. So that's going to be kind of a nightmare for the Republicans. It's going to be a nightmare for Biden as well, don't get me wrong, but it's just going to be a big mess. And they were really expecting to clean up in a big way, and they did not. Now let's talk about why I think the Democrats should not, in fact, be that excited. Hey man, I asked you to elaborate on how America has been winning. I will get to that next. The Senate is a still very open question. I think that we got very excited last night because I'm sorry, there's some light that's bothering me here. We got very excited about the Senate last night because we were expecting to spend the morning being really worried about Fetterman in Pennsylvania, but Fetterman won Pennsylvania quite clearly. And I remember going to bed last night. I was like, "But what's going on in Nevada?" Because Nevada apparently had a lot of trouble getting its votes in on time, and Nevada looks like at this point. We're going to find out a lot more. I guess it's 1:20 p.m. here on the East Coast. There's an 11:30 Clark County, Nevada announcement, sort of big vote drop. So I guess that's 2:30 in the afternoon my time. So in about an hour and 10 minutes, Nevada is going to drop hopefully going to drop its last bunch of votes, or potentially they're going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're having trouble with these votes. We're going to need another day or two." But at this point in Nevada, for the Senate, the Republican is leading. If Clark County comes out with votes today and says, "Oh, no, here are a whole bunch more Democratic votes, the Democrat has won," then Biden has done it, and Biden has managed to retain control of the Senate. If the Republicans win Nevada today or later this week, then everything comes down once again. This is deja vu. This is the same way that the control of Congress came down 2 years ago. Was it in January or was it in December of 2020 or January of 2021? Georgia had a runoff election where both of their Senate seats were up, I think because of a retirement or a death. Both of their Senate seats were up, and because Donald Trump decided to go to war with the Georgia Republican establishment that refused to give him a state he did not win in the presidential election, both of the Georgia senators became Democratic, and Biden got the one vote majority that he's had in the Senate for the past 2 years. So that one vote majority that he's got in the Senate looks like there's a distinct chance, it's still entirely possible that Nevada could come out. There's still some votes outstanding in Arizona, but I feel like probably not, hopefully not enough to get the Republicans over the top. It seems like there's significant votes outstanding, but the Democrat is like 5% ahead. So that seems very hard to surmount. It looks like Nevada, what happens in Nevada in the next couple hours, next couple days, is incredibly important. If it goes Republican, which it very much could, the Republican is currently leading with the majority of the votes in, then it comes down to Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock. Is that his name? Versus Warnock. Herschel versus Warnock in Georgia, December 6th. And that runoff will determine the status of the Senate. And that is worrisome. Two things can be true at once. This is a shocking and impressive victory for the Democrats to have had the best midterm performance for an incumbent president since George W. Bush within a year of 9/11 back in 2002. It's a stunning performance. That can be true, but the Democrats can also lose in all practical terms. If they lose that runoff, that if two things happen, if they lose in the next hours and days in Nevada and they lose that Georgia runoff, then the U.S. government, the U.S. legislature does nothing over the next 2 years other than investigate and impeach, possibly serially impeach, Joe Biden. They will absolutely not have the votes. This was always unlikely. But the Republicans will absolutely not have the votes to kick Biden out of power. But if they control the Senate, they will have the votes necessary to have an impeachment trial. And then Biden will not be convicted, will not be removed by that impeachment trial. The votes aren't there. And then they can just start another impeachment trials. And if the Republicans control the Senate, which is still very, very possible, we'll talk a little bit more about what that December 6th election will look like. If the Republicans still control the Senate, that means that Biden cannot approve a single judge, can't do anything to make abortion safer, can't even appoint if important people in his government resign, he can't even replace them because a lot of them need to be Senate approved. So yeah, things are likely to get, I think that probably military leaders that have to be Senate approved, those guys will go through. You'll only need to get 1 or 2 Republicans for that. But yeah, that'd be basically like the end of the Biden domestic agenda if the Republicans win in Nevada and then win in Georgia on December 6th. And I think that's very possible. With the way that the votes have looked, with the fact that actually the Republican governor in a rerun of a 2018 race, I believe it was, the governor Brian Kemp, I think, of Georgia, Republican governor, beat Stacey Abrams again, and I think beat her worse. If the Georgia Republicans, and this is again another Donald Trump choice, if the Georgia Republicans had put up a baseline decent candidate, they probably would have won already, and we'd already be talking about how Biden is going to survive the Republican Senate majority. Thankfully for the Democrats, and for people who want the Democrats to do well, which includes me, if that wasn't obvious already, Trump chose Herschel Walker. I believe he's a former, very successful college and professional American football player. He also appears to be a truly, truly abysmal human being. He's running as a hardcore conservative Republican um, on a family values ticket. The recent revelations coming out almost on a daily basis about serial abuse of his partners, abuse of his multitude of children by different partners, his paying for abortions. He is almost a caricature of what a irresponsible, amoral professional sports star is. He is also African American, which I think the Republicans, or Trump at least, were like, oh look, the African American vote's very important in Georgia. We'll put this guy up, and they'll love him. And I think a lot of African Americans find that pretty insulting, as I certainly would. The Warnock is a pastor, I believe. I don't know. Presumably is he AME or some version of American Protestantism. He is a guy who actually, this is the Democrat, is a guy who actually leads church congregations. I think there's been I just had a nightmare view. Like, what if they found a single indicator that he was even in a small way unfaithful or had any whiff of scandal to him, then I think hilariously Walker would clean his clock. But Warnock is the guy who's Warnock, along with the other Georgia senator, because of the weirdness. I think Warnock was finishing somebody's term or something. He ran 2 years ago, so the entire country's future depended in 2020 on whether or not the Republicans could find any viable opposition research on Warnock. So it seems unlikely to me that any kind of scandal will come out for Warnock over the next month or so, but that was like a horrific thing to think about. So Warnock just seems like an amazing stand-up guy. He ran an amazing campaign back in 2020, and he's running against an absolute nightmare person today, December 6th. So that should help, but the problem is that I think that even Donald Trump realizes how badly he screwed up and messed up things for the Republican Party and himself by going to war with the Georgia Republicans in 2020. And I also think after Ron DeSantis' extraordinary performance in Florida last night, I think that there's a real, I think Donald Trump has got to be pretty conscious of the fact that he's now he's in a much more real fight against Ron DeSantis for the soul of the Republican Party. Does the Republican Party have a soul? For power in the Republican Party. So I think Trump is going to be finding ways to look real nice. So I would expect, in stark contrast to the way that he sabotaged the Republican candidates back in 2020 in the Georgia runoff, I expect him to practically move to Georgia and campaign with Herschel Walker all the time. I expect him to be completely backed by the Republican establishment in that. I expect Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump to compete with compete with themselves, with each other in cozying themselves up to this monster that the Republicans are running in Georgia. I should probably be less dehumanizing. Herschel Walker is an African American, so speaking about him that way is really fucked up, and I shouldn't do that, even if he is a Republican and it seems like a pretty bad human being. I should not speak about him in a dehumanizing way, and I apologize for that. So anyway, so I think that it's a little premature. It is a victory. It is a great victory for the Democrats to have done this well in the midterms, but they can still lose it all. So I think that Democrats should be conscious of that and should be doing everything they can to get behind Monica Raphael. I can't believe I've forgotten his first name. Pastor Warnock. I'm not even sure. I don't really know what denomination he is either. So that is kind of interesting. Why am I happy about yesterday's election. And I am very happy about yesterday's election because I think there are, even though the Democrats are still in jeopardy, and I think that the prospect of a all Republican Congress over the next 2 years is a very grim one, that is very possible, and would lead to Republican victory in 2024, which I think would be a nightmarishly bad thing. Um, I'm really happy about this election because what we've seen on a variety of different axes is depolarization in the United States. I think that most media figures in the United States, left and right, both love the idea that the United States is in some kind of unreconcilable conflict with itself. We're closing in on civil war. There's this horrible polarization. We're more divided than we ever have been. I think I've made pretty clear on this channel that I find those narratives to be nonsense. I think it's you've got a variety of political figures, political hacks, really, just trying to construct these narratives that are exciting, much the same way that the Pentagon loves to pretend that China and Russia are meaningful threats to the United States when they really aren't. I'm not a big fan of this sort of narrative, polarization narrative, and how much Americans hate each other or whatnot. And yesterday's election was a great demolishing of this idea of polarization. We have seen in Florida, we've seen a stunning, this is not a new story, this has been a story of a number of past elections, but momentum gathered with the election last night as well. In Florida, you've seen tons of Latinos coming out for the Republicans. I know folks like to pretend, oh, no, that's just a Florida thing because of all the Cuban and Venezuelan refugees. It's not. Even in Texas, which turned out pretty well for the Democrats last night. A lot of House races that were expected to go red actually went blue. Even there, we see a growing Latino participation for the Republicans. I think Nevada, where it looks like the Republican is going to win. I hope not, but that's definitely seems like the likelihood right now. In Nevada, where the Republicans win, that's also about Latinos and not about Cuban refugees. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of Republicans winning. However, I am a big fan in the destruction of this pernicious narrative that both Republicans and Democrats have been pushing for 20 years now, that people of color can only vote for one party. I can regret the fact that the Democrats are doing more poorly, but also celebrate the depolarization of political parties in the United States along racial lines. I don't think you're going to see, by 2024, you're going to see the Republicans completely abandon racist messaging around the border, around just people generally, this great replacement nonsense that Tucker Carlson tends to go in for. I don't think you're going to see it completely abandoned by 2024, but you're going to see it start to slip away. And I think by 2026, it's going to be a non-entity. I think it is a good thing, even if it's bad for Democrats. I think it is fantastic that this idea that, we're going to be a non-white majority sometime soon, and that just means the Democrats are going to win forever, which was actually an idea put forth by Democrats before the Republicans started touting it in a more racist, great replacement sort of way. So I think it is a little unfair for Democrats to complain about Republicans pushing forward this theory that the Democrats put forward for 20 years. So the complete demolishing of this idea that people vote along racial lines is something that we saw more reinforcement for last night. Something else I like is, so the kind of crazy thing is that the Democrats did so well in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, even in Texas, in House races, that the reason that this is the lower level part of the legislature, the reason that the Democrats are going to lose their majority, primary reason the Democrats are going to lose their majority in the House of Representatives is because they're going to lose so many seats in New York and California. So that is, we talked about racial depolarization. We've now got geographic depolarization. New York and California are blue states, the bluest of the blue states, bastions of the Democratic Party, and it's their House representatives going over to the Republicans. Not all of them by any means, but New York and California are two of the top four biggest states in the union. They have dozens. Yeah, I think they literally have dozens of House seats each. And of course, the majority of New York and California House seats are still Democratic, but there are a lot of toss-ups. And a lot of those toss-ups are going Republican, and that's why the Democrats are going to lose their majority in the House. Again, not a result I prefer, but it is good for America. It is good for the United States and good for the Americas more generally, to have politics depolarize in the United States along regional lines, along racial lines. It was always absolutely ridiculous to talk about the potential of a civil war in the United States or whatnot. And this election last night made that less likely. The idea that immigrants automatically vote for Democrats, completely discredited last night. The idea that Latinos or African Americans or Asians are automatic Democrats, further discredited last night. So yeah, that's a very good thing for America in the long term, even if in the short term it is very bad for the Democrats. Also, New York and California, it's interesting. So I live in the state of New York, and there are a lot of really poorly run elections in the United States. There are a lot of Republican administrations where folks are making choices that endanger the vote, but probably the worst organized voting in the country is probably in New York State. New York State is not as famous for having corrupt machine politics as, say, Illinois is, but it's got a pretty corrupt political scene. Voting is just difficult in New York. And it's kind of nice to see the New York Democratic Party humiliated. It's a organization that deserves humiliation, is in desperate need of reform, and to see that they are being sort of shown up without actually losing the state house to the Republican, which seemed like a real possibility. That's kind of a good thing. I think discussing the election, it would be I would be remiss if I did not point out that abortion had a tremendous deal to do with this. The three most important figures in the Democratic overperformance in this election are Donald Trump, Samuel Alito, and Clarence Thomas. You all know who Donald Trump is. Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are the harder of the hardcore conservative Republicans on the Supreme Court. Roberts, the Chief Justice, who was also a conservative appointed by George W. Bush, did not want to overturn abortion rights in the United States as explicitly as Alito and Thomas forced him to in a decision that came down this late summer, early fall. That abortion decision was a catastrophe for Republican electoral chances, and if the Democrats play their cards right, it will continue to be a disaster. So it was both abortion and Donald Trump's terrible candidate choices that sunk the Republicans last night. Fascinating election, went a lot better for the Democrats than I think anybody expected. Couple other things I wanted to mention about the election before I just dive into Q&A. The Florida vacuum concept, I guess I talked about it already, but it's just fascinating. And it does have potential repercussions for elections going forward. If disgruntled Republicans just keep moving away from these purple states to Florida, those purple states get bluer. That's a real thing. That's kind of crazy. Educated voters, also interesting. This was a suspicion I'd had for quite some time, and I think it was a factor. But I don't think it would have been as successful a factor if it weren't for Trump's poor choices and abortion stuff. But what has happened because of Donald Trump is a swing of educated suburban white voters. The kind of folks used to be just natural Republicans, like, oh, we like low taxes, what have you. That group has had a massive swing towards the Democrats, and that is the group that usually votes in midterm elections. There's I think probably right on the edge of racist tweet I saw from a conservative commentator yesterday saying that, wow, it sure does take a lot of Latinos to make up for the loss of a few white suburban voters who tend to vote all the time. And that's a valid point. Another great point that actually was made on the patrons only Discord we have here is just how terrible. I think Logo pointed this out, right? Just how terrible this election result is for both Russia and Saudi Arabia. I think regardless, it would be much better if for Biden and the Democrats if they held on to the Senate. But even if they don't, even if they do hold on to the Senate, they're not going to hold on to the House. So Biden's domestic policy is largely dead. Maybe he'll be able to do some protectionist stuff with jobs and whatnot by triangulating and focusing on a few particularly heterodox Republicans in the House. There are in the Senate. There are already Republicans who will vote for more protectionist, sort of anti-China, bring the jobs home stuff. So I don't know, maybe that's possible. But more broadly, Biden's next 2 years are going to be about foreign policy. And in that foreign policy, he's going to be liberated in certain ways. And he's no longer going to really particularly care about what Saudi Arabia wants. After Saudi Arabia worked very hard to screw him over. So I'm kind of excited about that. Russia, this is bad for Russia. I am not somebody who is big on Russiagate or anything like that. In fact, I think that the Democratic obsession with Russia had a pretty big role to play in convincing Putin to invade Ukraine. But I do, and I also think that the idea that Putin somehow steered the election back in 2016, I think it's nonsense, frankly. I mean, he tried, but I don't think it was significant in any way, nor do I believe in collusion. I say all that to point out that Russia was a huge loser in this election. I think one of the things that Putin has been hanging out for is the idea that Trump or Trump-adjacent Republican politicians were going to be more friendly to him. J.D. Vance, actually, the guy who just won in Ohio, one of his first comments as a candidate was, "I don't care about Ukraine." I think that probably Putin's hopes were always kind of misplaced, even if this had been a massive red wave. The military-industrial complex loves Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It allows us to sell weapons to everybody, and we especially love selling weapons that are given to Ukraine. I think that Donald Trump illustrated that you can talk all the smack you want about the priorities of the military-industrial complex as a Republican in power in the United States, but you're not going to be able to find any Republicans to do your work for you. So I think Putin, it was always overstated, this idea that the Republicans were somehow going to help Putin. But it was something he was hoping for. It is something that Tucker Carlson's been pushing pretty hard. And with a red wave, there is a chance, not that Putin was going to get like a full U.S. withdrawal or anything, but he did have higher chances of negotiated victories, and those chances are gone. So Russia lost. One thing that's really great, I saw this on Twitter and have been retweeting it mightily, and this is possibly the most exciting fallout here. The Democrats have lost Florida. For 20 years now, Florida has been the swing state of swing states, very helped by the fact that it tends to be the state that announces results the most quickly because, in fact, their elections were so bad in 2000, famously tossing the election to George W. Bush, somewhat tragically. I think they really did actually get their elections together, so they tend to do a good job and get the results out pretty quickly. Plus, they're in the farthest East Coast. So for 20 years, the Democrats have sort of really, really not wanted to offend Florida voters. Yesterday's election, in a election where the story was generally Democratic outperformance and Democratic success, the Democrats got absolutely crushed in Florida. The idea that Florida is a purple state, Florida is a swing state is largely over. So that could mean that Biden no longer really gives a shit about the priorities of Florida voters. And the interesting thing is that Florida voters, specifically Cuban refugees, does it even make sense to call them refugees at this point? They've literally been in Florida for 60 years now. So it's under the second and third generation at this point. Cuban refugees, Venezuelan refugees are some of the most hardcore anti-Latin American leftism voters in the country. Trump derailed a lot of positive developments in Latin America in order to cater to Florida voters. And Biden, because he still had hopes of winning back Florida voters, was really reticent in opening ties back up with Cuba. Do you remember we were able to get Cuban cigars for a moment there at the end of the Obama administration, then Trump shut that down. Biden wasn't really interested in going against those Trump policies because he was still hoping he could win votes in Florida. It's now clear that he, and if he can't, no Democrat, can get votes in Florida. So fuck it. It's time to end the Cold War, finally, in Latin America. There's now a serious chance that this Democratic administration, this month or even this week, could just go ahead. Maybe they'll wait until after the December 6th runoff, probably. Not that it's that salient for Georgia, but they probably will. But the Biden administration could just say, screw it. Sanctions and embargo with Cuba are done. Sanctions on Venezuela are done. They need to do that anyway because Venezuela is an oil and gas producer, and they need U.S. investment back in there to reconstruct the industry that first Chavez and then Trump destroyed. So yeah, that's awesome. I think that there was basically the trend of this century of the U.S. and Latin America has been pretty good. First, because the Bush administration was more interested in screwing with the Middle East than it was with Latin America, than the Obama administration. So it was like a solid 16 years of the United States just sort of being like, you know what, Latin America is going to do what it's going to do. And that actually had effects that worked out really well for the United States. There was a left-wing wave, and then that left-wing wave wasn't that successful, so then more right-wing politicians that were a little more America-friendly started coming in. So it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? So it was really good under the Bush and Obama administrations that the United States was sort of like hands off with Latin America. And then after his last midterm, Obama went all the way and said, screw it, let's start talking to Cuba again, which was a real seismic shift. That's how we started getting Cuban cigars. And then Trump came into power, was like, I want to reward Florida, which has been good to me, and all these like crazy Cuban and Venezuelan politicians. So he cracked down on all of that, threatened to invade Venezuela, initiated massive sanctions on Venezuela, put Cuba on like the supporters of terrorism list, which is nonsense. And Biden hasn't backed off on any of that. Now I think Biden has been set free to further sanity in Latin America, to finally let the old Cold War policies of hostility towards anybody who like thinks a left-wing thought in Latin America die. That works out better for the United States. That works out better for Latin America, obviously. demilitarizing the hemisphere. That is a tremendously positive result that is possible. And even if Biden's only in power for 2 years and DeSantis comes in, there's probably going to be limits to what he can get away with if there's more business relations between Cuba and the United States. Because there just isn't really a real conflict between Cuba and the United States other than a bunch of whiny bitches in Florida who expect to get their grandparents' property back. And honestly, who cares about them? I sure don't. It's funny. I think my family actually had some Cuban property that was taken away from us by the communists. Oh well. Let's see. Did you vote for Biden or Trump? I voted for Biden, obviously, because I'm someone who reads. Is Kanye going to run again in 2024? He's not going to. I mean, he might run again in 2024, but you don't get to be openly anti-Semitic in the United States and run again. Kanye is an anti-Semite. He's not like someone like me who questions actions that Israel takes. No, he's an open anti-Semite who talks about essentially the Jews and their money. That's not appropriate. That's a cancellation I wholeheartedly approve, and I'm a free speech fundamentalist normally. But yeah, I think Kanye West is sad. I think that I did. There was a Kanye album I really enjoyed at one point, but I've never really gotten the worship of the guy. But it's very sad to see somebody who was at the top of a number of games and just lose it. I think it's very clear that he's having a mental break and is being taken advantage of by a number of people. But you just don't get to. I mean, who knows? I guess Mel Gibson, was allowed to be in movies again after a lot of apologies. But that was like a one-time thing, and he was drunk, and there wasn't video of it. Now, Kanye is just basically going on a big tour around the country being anti-Semitic on tape. I expect to not hear much about Kanye ever again. You voted for Biden because you read. You're the man. Yes. You keep saying Biden. You mean Obama and Jill. Look, I think Biden is an old man who's, declining in his capacities a little bit. But if you're talking about someone who was manipulated and made a clown puppet ventriloquist dummy of by the people around him, that would be Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a guy who I appreciated what Donald Trump would say about peace with Russia, about withdrawing from the Middle East, about what a nightmarishly bad thing it was that the United States had destroyed the Middle East. I thrilled, no matter how much I disliked him personally and politically on a range of things, I was thrilled when Donald Trump said he was getting out of the Middle East. Donald Trump said, I'm withdrawing from Syria 3 times. And every time he did that, I made a video saying, I don't like Donald Trump, but yes, withdraw from Syria. That's the right thing. And Donald Trump, who said all this and said he was going to be so friendly to Russia and we should be close with them, had the most aggressive policy against Russia of anybody since early Ronald Reagan. Helped to bring about the Ukraine war because he was so aggressive. Also, troop levels in Syria under Trump grew. So Trump did not make a single decision. He was utterly incapable of doing the most basic things that he talked about doing. That guy was a freaking clown. He wasn't like his wife's hand puppet or Obama's hand puppet. He was like that fat fuck Mike Pompeo. Sorry, I shouldn't swear. Hurts me on TikTok. That piece of garbage Mike Pompeo or John Bolton's hand puppet. Donald Trump was one of the most laughably dependent and weak presidents we've ever had. Joe Biden, and I do believe that Joe Biden is in an advanced state of mental decay. Senile Joe Biden is a braver and more serious and capable decision maker than Donald Trump has ever been in his entire life. We would not have left Afghanistan if Joe Biden had not been president. That was 100% the right decision to make. That was a brave decision to make. I can't think of another presidential decision this century that is as good as Biden's choice to get us out of Afghanistan. To be clear, Trump is the guy who said we should get out of Afghanistan. And Biden wouldn't have been able to get out of Afghanistan if Trump hadn't started that conversation. But Trump would have been utterly incapable of getting us out of Afghanistan because he's not a person who knows how anything works. So yeah, anyway. Watching from northern Nigeria, welcome. Florida is not the United States. Oh, Jack, Florida is very much the United States. We contain multitudes. Interestingly, Francisco Franco always had fine relations with communist relations. Francisco Franco was kind of gross. So kind of hard, but impressive to survive as a more or less open fascist into the 1970s. Let's leave 500 billion in advanced arms behind. Yeah, look, the reason why the withdrawal from Afghanistan was such a nightmare was because Biden got into office and was like, okay, well, clearly you've put the plans in place to get out of Afghanistan, right? Because the elected president said, let's leave Afghanistan, and that was the order he gave you a year and a half ago, right? And then he got into power, and the Pentagon was like, wait, what? We never did anything that Donald Trump told us to do. We just lied to him because he was a joke president. And Biden said, that's fucked up. That's unconstitutional. We're leaving Afghanistan. And then literally, this is documented. Mark Milley cried in a meeting when Biden was like, yeah, you actually have to do what 2 presidents in a row told you to do. So the reason the Afghanistan thing was such a nightmare was because of actual mutiny on the part of generals running the Afghanistan war, generals who lied to us for 20 years. I think if we lived in a civilized country, we probably would be, oh, did my TikTok just died? Well, that's fine. If we lived in a civilized country, well, bullying and harassment. No, I've not been bullying and harassment. I don't bully and harass. So apparently you're not allowed to say bad things about U.S. foreign policy on TikTok. That's interesting. But you can't get too vehement on TikTok. So yeah, I think that a lot of U.S. generals should be arrested over what happened with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But I think that Biden should be a celebrity. Okay. I think that Biden should be. Why was my live accent? I was doing so well on TikTok. Oh well. Can't win them all. And I'm happier here on the YouTube anyway. Regardless, yeah, I think the Afghanistan withdrawal was an extraordinarily positive thing that Joe Biden did. One of the best. I think the three most exciting things that I've seen under the Biden years are Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan, the giving funding back to the Internal Revenue Service, and the possible victory in Congress, which we shall see probably on December 6th. Do we have more questions or comments, or no super chats? Nothing to say about it? What do you think about the correlation between midterms and Russia leaving Kherson? That's something that's amazing. Do I think there's a correlation? Probably not. I think that maybe, for I don't know if Putin thought he was getting any kind of meaningful results, relief out of these elections, but he would know that if somehow a Republican legislature, it would have had to have been a more powerfully Republican legislature than what we've got. If a Republican legislature was going to somehow give Russia a break, it would have been in January, when the Congress actually sits, would be the earliest that could have happened. So he would have had to stick it out for much, much longer. I feel like the turnaround time, it doesn't make a ton of sense. I guess it's possible to imagine that if the news out of the United States, at this point, literally just 12 hours ago, yeah, no, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's just sort of a happy coincidence. But if the news was, and also, I mean, let's just be clear. So what has happened is that there's been an announcement of a withdrawal from Kherson, which is a huge deal. I think from Ukrainian sources I was seeing, just looking at it briefly this morning, it's not entirely certain that that's accurate. It could be Russian misdirection. I think probably it is Russia actually withdrawing from Kherson, but who knows? It could also be cover for a further push. Don't know. So it is a little bit early to tell, but I do think it is a legitimate Russian withdrawal from Kherson, and it's probably not related to the election. Maybe if the election had gone incredibly well for the Republicans, then maybe Putin would reverse himself. But I feel like the turnaround, the timing is too quick. Like, I think, did this happen because of the election results? If we'd gotten this withdrawal announcement on Friday rather than on Wednesday, that would make a little more sense. TikTok is a pain. I agree, TikTok is a pain, but I think it also kind of resurrected this YouTube channel because I think after seeing how successful some of my content is on TikTok, I think it's pretty clear that YouTube has been, in fact, I usually hate it when people say this because it's usually such a whiny excuse for losing one's audience. But I do think that YouTube has been fairly seriously throttling my reach for a number of years now, and that is not a concern on TikTok. On TikTok, I kind of regularly get 100,000 views on videos, and that hasn't happened on YouTube in 3 years now. It seems Russia is going on the defensive, driving a much bigger stalemate. Ultimately, this might be the last big change in Kherson before the war ends, possibly. Actually, I think that you can probably make a good case for that, Trustworthy Worm, that this is sort of the last Russia being on that side of the Dnieper River. It's interesting because I remember when people were sort of wargaming this at the beginning, the expectation was that Russia would just easily take everything on that side of the Dnieper River. But now it's only in the southern part of Ukraine where there doesn't appear to be much in the way of. The south of Ukraine is much more sparsely populated and has fewer or a lighter Ukrainian history, in fact. So it's interesting that the Dnieper, just in the underpopulated part, seems to be the limit of Russia's ambitions. Could this lead to a broader stalemate? Yes, but and I think, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, because I would like them to take back everything that Russia attempted to take in February. I wonder if they don't start crossing the Dnieper right now in the south, will they ever be able to? I don't know. But there's also, I think, a fair amount of opportunity for back and forth up in the north as well. I don't. I think you can make a case that the war might not continue, but or rather, the war might devolve into stalemate at this point. But I think that's probably a little too much to hope for. I could see a war of movement continuing for years. Yaron Brook said he's willing to debate you. I don't know who's Yaron Brook. What's he gonna debate me on? Yaron Brook. Oh gosh, a debate on Israel? That sounds horrible. I don't like talking about Israel. It makes me sad. Well, he does have a lot of. He's got about the same amount of subscribers as I do. My thoughts on Jordan Peterson. Oh wow, he's pro Sargon of Akkad. That's not good. Biden's disasters and the effects on the midterms. That doesn't seem to have voting in the midterms. Live from New York City. Yaron Brook on Ben Shapiro, Robert Reich in South Africa. I guess I debate people. How How do you think the occupation of Iraq will continue? Um, I don't know that. I mean, yeah, the U.S. is occupying Iraq. The U.S. occupies the whole Middle East. It's like, what do you mean by occupation of Iraq, though? Like, are we? I mean, we're not occupying it to the extent we tried to under Bush or even Obama. I think that we are there with the quiet approval of Iraqi politicians. I would obviously like us to get all of our troops out of there because the only real purpose we're serving there is, I've said this many, many times, is just to be sacrificial lambs to start our next $1 trillion war with Iran. I don't think we add any stability to Iraq or Syria at this point. I think there's this tremendous misconception that, oh no, Iraq was destabilized because we left. Iraq wasn't destabilized by the Islamic State because we left. Iraq was destabilized by the Islamic State because we opened a free playground for jihadists in Syria. Obama did create the Islamic State, not by withdrawing from Iraq, but by dumping billions of dollars into the destruction of Syria. So yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, Logo puts out that I just got almost 400 viewers on TikTok, despite having less than half the subscribers. Yeah, I mean, I think we're closing in on half the subscribers. Can a BRICS currency rival the dollar? No. I mean, it's a super chat, so I should say more about that. So I think the whole BRICS currency theory was something from February. This idea that commodities were now going to be the new basis of a currency, and assuming that Russia had a lot more pricing power than it did, than it in fact did. And this is also something that was born out of the incredible supply crunch that we were experiencing at the beginning of this year. That crunch is in a myriad of ways dissipated. Oil and gas are still kind of expensive, but a lot less expensive than they should be considering the disruptions to the market. So yeah, I just don't, to have a currency, you need, so like, I think one of the great downfalls of the euro has been its lack of unification. Yes, there is a European central bank. Is there a BRICS central bank? There is a European central bank, but their lack of a unified fiscal policy, their lack of unified nation that is a basis of this currency has yielded a wide variety. I mean, I don't fully understand currency. I'm not entirely certain anybody does. But it's clear to me that the fragmentation within the European Union has made the euro less viable, less trustworthy, less stable as a reserve currency. So the idea that Brazil, Russia, India, and China are somehow going to put together a more viable currency than the euro, which does not rival the dollar, strikes me as really freaking unlikely. The fact that China and Russia certainly are in the midst of what can be sometimes characterized as demographic collapse. I think maybe that's a little alarmist, but yeah, there's just nothing about that BRICS, the prospect of a BRICS currency that strikes me as at all viable. Yeah, bear in mind, Ukraine already has control of 3/4 of the area to the east of the Dnipro River. An offense on Zaporizhzhia, I've never figured out how to pronounce either of those things, I apologize, is next. Do you think Afghanistan will stay as one country or break up? I think Afghanistan will stay as one country. Hazaras and Pashtuns never seem to be on good terms. Lol, good luck trying to get India and China to agree on anything. I think that's another problem with BRICS. So we're going to have a currency that's based on countries that have violent border disputes. Jack Hawkins, where is Zaporizhzhia? What part of the country? To cut off Crimea, the Ukes, Jesus, need to drive towards Mariupol. So And so Zaporizhzhia is a I'm sure I'm pronouncing that horrifically, is a town that Ukraine already controls. Zaporizhzhia, I think, is Melitopol in Zaporizhzhia? Um, because I think Melitopol is, if Ukraine has really taken Kherson, then the only serious cities that Russia has taken would be Melitopol and Mariupol, right? I guess Severodonetsk, but that was kind of a small town, right? Um, so yeah, Melitopol is, I believe, in Zaporizhzhia, and I believe it also controls the access from Crimea to Mariupol. So that is the drive towards Mariupol. What happens when all fertilizer reserves in China and Russia get depleted by 2040, and only Morocco is left as the sole provider of phosphate? We'll find another source of phosphate. I think that's what will happen. Um, Logo, this Ukraine nonsense has to stop. I don't know what that means. What's up with Olaf Scholz visiting Beijing? I meant to do a short about this, and I might still look. Like Germany has four. It's funny because this is pathologized in U.S. discussion for obvious reasons, but Germany, completely rationally, has been desperately trying to find an alternative to the United States for 20 years now, or at least something to balance against the United States. Everyone's like, oh, how dare Germany have these relationships with Russia and buy all this gas? It's like, are you kidding me? Like, Germany's desperate for somebody in the world to be powerful other than the United States, this military hegemon that still occupies military bases in Germany, controls the world economy, controls everything about Germany's fate. Like Germany just wants to diversify the powers that are in the world completely rationally, and their plan to do that with Russia was utterly defeated by Putin's idiotic invasion. So it's not surprising to me at all that Olaf Scholz is still eager to keep the China thing going. I think there in the United States there is way, way, way too much of an assumption that because it's game on against Russia now, it's game on against China as well. And I think probably it's a good thing that Germany is trying to push back against that. I think they're going to lose. I think Washington D.C. desperately, desperately wants a war with China and is doing everything in its power to bring it about before China enters into the period of crisis / decline that it's got coming for the next couple decades. The Pentagon, it's like, oh my God, we're going to miss this war we've been planning around for 20 decades and lose all our budget. So the United States is desperately trying to get China to invade Taiwan, and I think Germany's trying to, keep that from happening. So yeah, I'm totally down with Olaf Scholz visiting Beijing. I think it's probably going to fail. I'm beginning to come to the conclusion that the United States will start a war over Taiwan before too long, but we'll see. Zaporizhzhia. So even though there's two zhas there, you just say it once. Zaporizhzhia. What other border disputes do you anticipate will occur this year or the next year? Will Taiwan and Tajikistan deal with fighting to retain territory? I don't think Taiwan's going to happen in the next couple of years. I think it could. I think the chances are going up. The United States is working very hard for it. But I think Taiwan, if China's stupid enough to try and conquer Taiwan physically, I would probably put that in 2030 still. Tajikistan, I don't know a ton about the conflict between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. I do know that they've got terrible borders that Stalin organized for them, and it's pretty grim. Will Taiwan and Tajikistan deal with fighting to return power? So yeah, I don't know if there's going to be fighting there with Tajikistan. How long do you think it would take for Catalonia to gain independence? We got no super chats, huh, guys? I don't think Catalonia or Basque will gain independence. I just don't. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting thing. I don't think we heard a lot about Catalonian independence in the direct aftermath of Brexit. We haven't heard much about it since. I mean, whatever happened to Puigdemont, or something like that? There was the Catalan politician who did he declare independence and then flee Spain, or I don't know. I'm not generally a big fan of dismembering countries. I think it's I enjoy the progression towards more consolidation. I'm a big fan of the EU. Is it possible? Maybe I'm just not following events in Spain or Catalonia. I'm sorry, for those who might not know, Spain was a country that was sort of a basket case during the great 19th century period of industrialization and hypernationalism. So while France and the United Kingdom, that were both in periods of consolidation, did a pretty good job of sort of consolidating and wiping out a lot of minority approaches, Spain did not. So Catalonia is also manages to be, I think, significantly richer than the rest of Spain, which helps. And the Basque Country are both regions in Spain that are sort of perennially arguing for autonomy or independence. Um, I wonder if Brexit has certainly dissuaded other European countries from contemplating exit from the European Union, but I wonder if, in a weird way, in a not direct way, Brexit has also somewhat dissuaded Catalan and Basque independence types. I have no support for that. I don't. I'm just completely speculating at this point. Um, will Scotland gain independence? That's a great question, and I think that it's a real possibility. I think it's not quite as straightforwardly obvious a possibility. I think that in order to win, the EU would have to make clear that they'd be eager to welcome Scotland. I don't know that the UK is now a much more foreign country from the EU, and I wonder if the EU would be like, well, the United Kingdom does have a more serious military component than almost anybody other than France in Europe. Do we really need this agita of like actively advocating for Scottish independence? I think the as an independent entity without the EU would be kind of silly. So, as someone who's a huge opponent of Brexit, I think people kind of assume that it's a little more straightforward than it actually is for Scotland to declare independence. Um, I think what's much more interesting and much more likely is EU independence. Sorry, Northern Ireland. I think that Northern Ireland is the chances. I think there's a famous meme where there was like a Star Trek show from the 1990s that talked about the Irish reunification of 2024 as like just a sort of a alt history thing for the science fiction show Star Trek, and the chances of by 2024 actually having a united Ireland are not zero. I'm not saying they're high, but they're higher than you'd think, and Brexit made them much higher. So yeah, I think the chances of Northern Ireland opting to stay with the EU and reuniting with Ireland and leaving the United Kingdom, that I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen. Certainly not that it's definitely going to happen by 2024, but I think that's a lot more likely than Scottish independence. And if Northern Ireland successfully carves off and joins the EU, then maybe 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years down the line, that makes Scotland more likely. The thing is, the EU just isn't that interested in expansion. It's been pulling teeth for them to make really minor commitments towards getting the former Yugoslavian countries piece by piece into the EU. And I think much higher priority in terms of just geopolitical stability and now progress against Russia for the EU to add those small Balkan countries. than it would be to add Scotland. All kinds of things can change in 5, 10 years. Maybe the EU finally figures out how to grow economically again, and then maybe it gets more interested in expansion again. I don't know. Um, Hard to say. Hmm. What is one linguistic group you feel deserves more representation and autonomy? Lots of countries have small clusters of other languages, such as the Netherlands, Spain, even Germany, a Slavic one. It's a good question, Trustworthy. I'm not much of a fan of autonomy. you know, I think the borders we have are the borders we have. If In an entirely peaceful and democratically negotiated way, I think every group should have the right to its own schools or religion, of course, what have you. This idea of a free Kurdistan or a free Tigray or a free any number of things, it just doesn't. I just can't. Whenever I see that, I just can't think of anything other than South Sudan. That finally, a country that absolutely deserved its independence, one of the most unequivocally independence deserving places, subject to like racist or sectarian hegemony, definitely deserved to be free. And the second it became free, it fell into a civil war, killed 500,000 people, and remains in a more peaceful but like really grim stasis today. I'm just not into it generally. Um, Not that I'm against it, like I think that like in certain cases there's plenty, but I'm about less war, and I think that adjusting borders is always a war guarantee. So it's not really something I'm into. Hey, Lehman here. Why is Russia spending time in eastern Ukraine if they could have used those forces to take Kiev? Because they tried and they couldn't. They couldn't use those forces to take Kiev. Russia is like not a good military. They're bad at it. They're bad at fighting, and I mean that's sort of historically been the case. I think we've got some shorts talking about it. Like the two really really impressive. I think there's like back in like the 1700s, like Suvorov or something was impressive and did impressive things, but the really only really impressive um, Russian military actions in the industrial era are like the 1814 march across Europe against Napoleon and the 1944-45 crushing of Hitler. In both of those cases, they had their massive, massive manpower and were also massively armed and subsidized by the Anglo hegemon of the time, and Britain, in the Napoleonic Wars, in the United States in World War II. So, yeah, Russia, it's just really bad on offense. Like, if it doesn't have someone who's speaking English arming them, they're just not successful. I'm sorry, I am fading, folks. It's been a long night. But yeah, like, see if we can do another 35 minutes of Q&A. Let's see. I know you don't like to talk about Israel, but what do you think about the Algerian government's recent increased focus on Palestine? I think it's bad for the Algerian government. It's probably the just and moral and brave thing to do on Algeria's part, but I think Algeria should get its own house in order, frankly. Yeah, I think Algeria needs to worry about the fact that the United States really loves enemies, and with Russia collapsing and China um, looking a lot less threatening. Uh, I think Algeria should probably not be putting itself on the dartboard. But yeah, I mean, I totally get and see as justified Arab solidarity and rage at what Israel's been doing to Palestine, but I don't see much of a chance of success or positivity, or I don't see a win for any Arab country that decides to advocate loudly for Palestine. And honestly, having another oligarchical, having like another oligarchical kleptocracy rooting for Palestine kind of half-heartedly to control its own people isn't very good for Palestine either. I mean, it just doesn't. Yeah. Anyway, hey Rob, what do you think about events in Haiti? Did I see that? So apparently the president, unelected, right, had justified a ask for an intervention because there were some gangs that controlled something, and apparently the Haitian government handled that itself. That was something that was a news item I saw this week, but I haven't thought much about Haiti. Unfortunately, I have not done a deep analysis. I know that Haiti is a desperately sad place, in large part because of terrible abuse post independence of Haiti. I mean, one of the most inspiring revolutions in human history where slaves themselves rose up and threw off their chains, and then France and the rest of the white rich world in the 1800s made Haiti spend the entire 19th century paying off the slaveholders that they freed themselves from. Yeah, it's so grim. Any candidates for 51st state? England? Greenland? I don't know. What will happen with West Sahara? That's a great question. I think that what will happen with West Sahara is what has already happened with West Sahara. I think that uh, I can see and understand and agree with the anger of James Baker, among other figures, at the Trump administration essentially endorsing the Moroccan conquest of West Sahara. I understand that that is a principle violated. Annexation should not be rewarded. However, this is annexation that happened 50 years ago and has largely stood since. There is was it the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic? Is that what we got? There is a. Wow, I'm so out of it. There is a Polisario, Sadr. These are different names for more or less the same thing. Is a military group that controls some small parts of West Sahara with the support of Algeria. I don't think there's much, and I think the UN for a long time supported Polisario's approach, and so did the United States to a degree. I just don't think without that U.S. support, it's particularly viable anymore. So I don't know. I haven't checked in on West Sahara recently, but I think West Sahara is pretty much Morocco. Is that liquor in that bottle? No, just water. I have been sober for 18 years now. So yeah, I do not drink the booze. I used to just drink water out of plastic, but I think I read somewhere that we have too much plastic in our bodies or whatnot. So I do these little glass metal things. That's what I drink my water out of now. Who's a better ally in Persian Gulf, UK or France? I'd say they're both useless to differing degrees. Actively malicious. I think that the United Kingdom is much more willing to do as we ask. I think that the United Kingdom did a lot. Was an eager participant. Hung out with a lot of fun. Some very attractive. British people helping to destroy Syria across the 2010s. So I don't know. I guess the UK is probably a better ally to the United States. They're more eager to participate in and validate all our bad ideas. France, I think, is a little bit more of a sort of manipulating the United States to do things that are helpful to it. I think this is actually kind of fair. People are like, oh, like Gaddafi was gonna go on the gold standard instead of the dollar, so that's why we killed him. It's like, no, that doesn't check out to me. but I do think that the United States was persuaded to some extent by France to destroy Libya in 2010-11, and I think France was most eager in destroying Gaddafi in Libya in 2011 because it was a more real, what's the word I'm looking for? A more real, because Libya was setting himself up as too real of a rival to France's sort of quasi empire in Africa. I would love to debate with the YouTuber Destiny because Destiny is a big deal and that would be a great exposure for me. But I don't know how one would even go about debating with the YouTuber Destiny. Um, but yeah, I think that to the extent that anybody had any idea or good idea or common sense or freaking sanity at all in the U.S.'s choice to destroy Libya and give North Africa a lost economic decade, it was France who was trying to take out the Libyan competitor. So that is not good allyship. So I think the UK is generally eager to do what the US wants, sort of just play tag along because it helps the UK sort of pretend to still be a great power. Whereas France still has legitimate malign, not legitimate, like has still the France still has significant and malign interests in Africa, imperial interests that it tries to dragoon the United States into serving, and that's a bad thing. Okay, I think that's all the super chats. Yeah, I don't know how one goes about debating YouTube Destiny. Church Clutch Gian super chat. I'm sick of Labs personal development. Labs personal development. What will happen with the CSTO and breakaway ASSRs now Russia can't defend them? South Ossetia, Kazakhstan, Armenia. I think it varies. I think every story is different. I was very pleased. I should probably do another short about like it really does seem like Azerbaijan was very seriously interested a month or so back in pushing its advantage against Armenia after already winning a war against it back in 2020. And then the United States really just had to show up, diplomatically speaking. I think Pelosi visited Armenia. That's a Pelosi visit I was a big fan of. And also just Secretary of State. I can't believe Blinken and Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, just basically browbeat Azerbaijan. I think they organized some kind of meeting between the Armenian and Azerbaijani foreign ministers, and really with probably 6 hours of time from U.S. foreign policy principals. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. These are big deal U.S. diplomats, and with like literally 6 hours of their time, it seems like they kind of squashed. I'm really losing it. Kind of squashed the Azerbaijan's attempts to take Armenia. So yeah, I mean that's just one example. Like what's going to happen with South Ossetia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia and Georgia. I mean, Kazakhstan seems to really be much more strongly than Uzbekistan and others. Seems to be really clearly distancing itself from Russia. That presumably means getting closer to China, practically speaking. They can talk a good game about being more pro-Western. So yeah, it's a different story for every single one. Do you think Russia and Belarus will collapse after the war? I don't know. Honestly, don't know. I think after the war is something that's gonna. I see after the war as being like 2030s. I see it as more and more likely that well, I mean, anything can happen. The war in Ukraine could end tomorrow, but it could last a decade. So yeah. Aditya Mohan, thoughts on the diplomatic spat between Germany and France on key issues like defense and energy. Um, I think Germany and France both understand that they have a pretty deep and abiding interest in maintaining peace and cooperation between each other. And I think that in times of stress or even in normal times, it's natural for two very powerful countries that need each other desperately to fall into spats, or as you may say. I'm embarrassed. I'm not familiar with the details of whatever the current spat between Germany and France is. I know that Germany would like a lot more gas from every other source in the EU. Sort of an interesting reversal, whereas both Italy and Spain, countries that have been in a position over the past decade of sort of more or less having decade and a half, more or less having to go hat in hand to Germany, are now in the satisfying position of Germany coming hat in hand to them, asking for slices of the much more plentiful non-Russian natural gas that Italy and Spain get from places like Morocco and Algeria. Um, and I know that sort of France's approach to nuclear energy is much different from Germany's. So, but I don't know the details of this particular spat, but I do think that spats are somewhat normal. Actually, while we're here, let's see. Did we get new information from? Oh dear, that doesn't look good. Did we get new information from the Senate race? Do we know? Let's see. Do we know Senate? U.S. election results, U.S. Senate. Okay, no. So basically the New York Times finally called Wisconsin for the Republicans, which was pretty obvious. Georgia will go to a runoff. God damn it. So we've got to know what's going to happen in Nebraska. So we're no longer keeping track of. So Nevada, we still don't know. God damn it. No new information in Nevada. What a pain in the butt. I thought that was supposed to be. Nor in Arizona. Damn it. Yeah, so I have no further information for you on that topic. Let's see. Azeri annexation. I don't think the what in Iran. How do you think the economy of the UK will be for the next few years? Bad. I do not think it will be good. I mean, not like super, super bad. Like, I don't expect collapse. I just sort of expect a steady wicking away of the wealth and opportunities that came with the British, more or less, ownership of the European financial sector under the European Union. They left the European Union, so a lot of those opportunities are going to slip away. Do you think Russia and Belarus will collapse after the war? My man fighting the blackout. Did Putin really try to invade Kazakhstan? No, I don't think so. It's not the sense that I got. I think that before he invaded Ukraine, there was a serious leadership tussle in Kazakhstan. Nur Sultan Nazarbayev, I believe. Did I get that right? Yeah, I believe so. Was this sort of Kazakh communist leader under the Soviet Union. And then, actually, I'm not entirely certain, but he was certainly high up in that hierarchy. And he was, for 30 years, Kazakhstan's more or less unchallenged dictator. I think Kazakhstan was nowhere near on the same level as, say, Turkmenistan, but was still pretty one-party statish. Couple of years back, he appointed a new president. It was time for him to retire. What happened in the beginning of this year, fascinating series of developments. The new president basically moved against the old 30-year dictator and his family members and cronies. And it seemed like Russia more or less took his side, sending in troops to help him consolidate power. And that looked to me at the time like kind of a, I don't know if a masterstroke or coup against China's influence in Kazakhstan. It was sort of a reassertion of Russian power for him to come in and use Russian troops as more or less the kingmaker there. Those Russian troops withdrew fairly quickly, which they may be regretting now, because that self-same president, that Tokayev, I think, that Russia helped consolidate power, is now making a big stink about being pro-Western and more democratic and complaining. I'm not sure if it's complaining or just not endorsing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So it's not going quite as well as you'd have hoped. Could the British rejoin the EU? I think it would take at least a decade for that to happen. For that to be politically viable, it would take a decade. I mean, they barely actually managed to do Brexit 5 years later. So 6 years later. So I would think that. Um, Yeah, if Britain were to rejoin the EU, I would think that that would be something that people would start advocating seriously for in a number of years, and then might actually happen like in the 2030s, 2040s, assuming there still is an EU, assuming there's still a civilized world and the nukes haven't dropped since by then. Do you want all of the world to be Western liberalistic? I don't know if I want it. I just think it's what's going to happen. I think the main story, as with the, if you pull back a bit, and the main story of the 21st century so far is the opposite of American decline. It's actually American imperial consolidation. If you look at the past 20 years, or especially like the past 50 years, in terms of the extent to which everybody in the world has started living a life that's a lot more like the lives lived in the developed world, the United States specifically. Are we anywhere near getting 100% of the way there? Of course not. But compared to 50 years ago, I mean, everybody and their priorities are much more non traditional and sort of modern Western liberalistic. So it's not really a question of wanting, it's just what's happening and will continue to happen. And the classic example would, of course, be like um, uh, anti-Western Muslim jihadists, or extremists or takfiris or what have you, who are so desperately concerned with being as anti-Western and not Western as possible. But then a lot of the points of their doctrine, the organization, the organization of their organizations, the culture, the video game culture of their military cadres or what have you, it's all actually very Western. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to avoid. It's not like, question of wanting it. It's just what's happening. Um, I think I'm going to end about 15 minutes early, folks. How do I feel for the future of the Caribbean islands? Not good, really. Let's do sort of a speed round. Simple questions that should get me through the next 15 minutes. I'm really sorry. I was up all night with the elections, and I am losing touch at this point. The Caribbean islands, it's kind of sad because the Caribbean islands really benefited for a long period of time from the fact that they were such easy destinations from the United States, largely peaceful, not exactly cheap to get to, but cheaper than anywhere else. The great democratization of air travel since the 1980s, this was actually a deregulatory action that had some positive impacts, has meant that Americans and everybody else can go to vastly more places than just the Caribbean anymore. Latin America specifically. Like, why would you go to a Caribbean island where you just have nice beaches when you can go to Costa Rica where you have nice beaches, you have a rainforest, you have a volcano, you've got adventure sports, you've got this, that, and the other thing. So I think the Caribbean vacation lifestyle has been somewhat cannibalized by just the number of awesome destinations that the U.S., Canadian, Mexican tourist public can benefit from in other places. It's much easier to fly to Europe now. Why do Jamaica when you can do a Greek island? So yeah, I think that the Caribbean islands had this. The history of the Caribbean islands is sort of slave plantations, which were extraordinarily successful, horrific, of course, but there's the figures of like the percentage that Jamaica was of British trade, or the percentage that Saint what was Haiti called before it was called Haiti? Was that Saint Domingue? No, I can't remember. But the amount of money that the sugar plantations in Haiti yielded for the French crown or the French Republic, just obscene how much money was being made there. And I think the Caribbean, that was, slave-based sugar plantations were an incredible economic heyday. And then that faded. And then in the 20th century, the Caribbean islands experienced a massive tourist boom, and now that has faded. So the Caribbean kind of needs to figure out what's next. And that's sort of my thoughts on that. Poor Rob. No, not poor Rob. It's I love this job. I love that I get to be this engaged in something, and it's an incredible privilege to be able to have 75 people show up and listen to my thoughts on these things. So never poor Rob. It was I think it was a poor choice on my part to stay up as late as I did following election results. And I regret that I am nearly incapacitated at this point. How prominent will crashing drones be in warfare now due to their use in Ukraine? What's a semi? That's a really great question, Trustworthy Worm, and I've got a growing suspicion that a lot of people were sort of laughing at Russia's usage of Iranian drones. Oh, look at these cheap piece of crap things we can shoot down with a handgun. But they still explode, and there are a lot of them. And I think that might have some pretty serious dynamics, not just for Russian-Ukraine conflict, but for warfare going forward. Just the mismatch of putting a $10,000 drone up against a $1 million anti-air missile. The missile's gonna get the drone, but at a certain point, if you've got enough thousands of those drones, the math starts getting pretty ruinous for the defender. And I think that's pretty important. Do you play video games? I do not. In my senior year in college, I probably played something like 12 hours of Age of Empires 2 a day. I got really, really compulsive about that. I have a problem. I have a somewhat addictive personality and can be very compulsive about things. And I got way, 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 way too compulsive about that video game and haven't really played much of any video games since. There was this really stupid game called Typer Shark that I convinced myself I needed so I could type faster in law school, and I think it really hurt my performance in law school because I spent so much fucking time playing Typer Shark. So yeah, that was a dumb thing. So yeah, video games, I tend to avoid them. I get very compulsive about things. Weed did decent. No, I don't smoke weed either. Did South Asia happen? Anything interesting in geopolitics in the last months or weeks? Probably. Will combat. You know what I want to talk about? Oh my gosh, have you guys been following the extraordinary crash of cryptocurrency? Oh my gosh, it's under 17. My gosh. My gosh. So over the past 2 days, more or less, Bitcoin's down 20%. Ethereum is down 27%. Jesus. So what happened was one of the last, it was sort of billed as the Federal Reserve for crypto, FTX, an exchange, just crashed. This was the guy who was running around saving all the other bankrupt crypto projects. So he went under. So now crypto is crashing to new lows. Bitcoin is now significantly below the highs that it attained 5 years ago. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that the whole crypto fraud is coming pretty massively unstuck, and that's kind of fun. I had meant to talk about that a little bit more. Um, Thoughts on U.S. relations with Canada and Mexico? I mean, I think it's Canada and Mexico just get tied more and more tightly. And with this election, they're just sort of the possibilities of a more peaceful relationship in Latin America more generally, a Republican Party that, 2 to 4 years from now is less overtly hostile to Latin America. Um, these are really positive developments. I think that the relationship between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is in weird ways, in some ways, uh, closer, in a lot of ways not, but in some ways closer than the relationship between the EU countries. And I think that we're nowhere near free movement, but I think we'll see that in my lifetime. And yeah, I think we just get closer and closer, and I think that's a very good thing. One of the more hopeful things in geopolitics. Aren't you glad, Mastarina, or however you say? Yes. My understanding, I didn't make quite a study of it, but my understanding is that the Republican candidate for governor in Pennsylvania was particularly inappropriate and horrifying on a number of levels, and it is very nice to see him be roundly defeated. Do you think any country will utilize EMP technology for warfare? No. I mean, maybe, who cares? Like, I think the classic thing with EMP is like, yeah, like, it's a nuke, man. Like, it's not, like, the main problem isn't going to be nuclear winter or your electromagnetic pulse or whatever. It's the fact that a nuke was used. So, I mean, is it an interesting dynamic? Yes, but I feel like, people are like, oh, we got to get more serious about thinking about EMPs, and it's like, it's a nuke, man. Like, we're pretty serious about nukes and proliferation. So yeah. Opinion of Albania, the Balkan superpower, Enver Hoxha forever. No, I've always wanted to go to Albania. Wish I had, but I haven't. All right, I am going to end 5 years earlier. My name is Robert Morris. I try to do something longer than a short, at least once a week. You can find me on here. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Instagram, all under More Freedom Foundation or Mo Freedom Foundation. Some variety thereof. I have a podcast now. Did you guys know I have a podcast now? There's a link to it on the community page. You should go check that out. I wrote some books, Avoiding the British Empire, some other stuff. All right, folks. Yeah, I am out. I apologize for being so unconscious throughout this live chat, but um, I got you information, right? Theoretically, trying to make it so that my pathological Twitter addiction was actually a positive thing. Anyway, y'all are the best. Many thanks.